Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the On .NET Live Show, where our mission is to empower you, the .NET community, to achieve more. I'm your host, Scott Addy, and with me today are co-hosts Myra Wenzel and Cam Soper. Today, as many of you are already aware, we're straying from our normal format and we're bringing you an Ask Me Anything style show. We have several pre-submitted questions. We'll also be taking questions from the live chat. Now, if you've been around the .NET community for a while, chances are you've heard of today's guest, Scott Hunter. Scott, welcome to the show. What are you up to these days at Microsoft?
Thanks for having me. I had to wear my Scott Goo red polo today as well, just to, anytime you're talking, a Scott at Microsoft and you're speaking on .NET especially, you got to wear a red polo. So for folks that don't know me, I was part of the ASP.NET team and then the .NET team for pretty much the last 15 years as we reinvented .NET with .NET Core all the way through .NET 6. And then last October, I moved into what we call the Azure Developer Experience team. And our goal in that team is to make Azure great for all of our customers. So we build like some of the Azure PaaS services. So if you've ever used App Service, Azure Functions, Azure Container Apps, Logic Apps, API management, that's all kind of in the wheelhouse that I work in. We also build all the tools for Azure, whether they're the tools in Visual Studio for .NET, or they're the tools in VS Code for using our Azure services, or they're the developer command lines, or even the SDKs, all kind of are the area that I'm working on today.
Thanks for that intro. Cam, Myra, what do we want to tee off as our first question for Scott here?
Well, I actually have kind of a lighthearted question that I've been wanting to ask Scott for a long time, but I've never worked up the nerve before, and it kind of plays off of this question that David Pine asked in the chat. Do we have too many Scots in Microsoft? We have more Scots than Scotland.
I have 3 Scots as managers in my hierarchy.
That is true, Myra. You do.
I do have 3 Scots.
I've never actually looked at the address book to see what the number of Scots are in the actual address book. Scott Hanselman has a joke that he likes to make about me. Is my name is actually really Carl Scott Hunter. So I'm actually a Carl, and Scott Hanselman used to always say, "Oh, you switched your name to Scott just because, there's so many Scots in Microsoft." But
well, even on our team, it's a running. Well, Scott, I used to be on the same team with Scott Addy, and it was a running joke for us. Of course, Hanselman and you, Hanselman jokingly refers to as the lesser Scots, and Scott Guthrie as the greater Scott. So Scott Addy, we have a nickname for him as well. Scott, why don't you go ahead and share it?
Well, I can let you share that, but the answer folks are looking for here, a quick search for Scott yields 1,009 results in the employee directory. You can all sleep better tonight knowing that.
So we call Scott Addy Kirkland Scott, and I coined that term, right? Because like Kirkland products, they are less expensive, but every bit as high quality.
Yeah, the funny joke, and this is actually reality, is as Myra said, there's a lot of Scots in her management tree, and so in many cases, like my boss Amanda Silver or Julia Lucen, many times refer to me as Hunter, and then Scott Hanselman will be Hanselman because we're likely on the same call, and so you just can't say, well, Scott said this. Well, which Scott? And so we kind of reserve Scott for Guthrie, and then I'm Hunter, and then Scott Hanselman's Hanselman. So that's kind of, and it's really weird. My team, and Myra knows this. We talked to like Glenn Condron, who drives the ASP.NET team. I don't think he has ever called me Scott. He just calls me Hunter.
Yeah. And sometimes I'm confused, like when I have one-on-ones and stuff, like, is it with Hunter or is it with Hanselman? Because I don't know. But yeah, unless it's like when the time changes or anything. But Anyway, I think that was a fun, lighthearted question to start with. But maybe we can start getting into more of the meaty questions now.
Good.
I'll go ahead and start that one too, actually, because I do have a question that is near and dear to my heart. Scott, as you may be aware, that I work on the IoT docs for the .NET IoT stack, and I'm kind of curious as to where you picture, the ideal positioning for .NET in the IoT space. I mean, it's a space that's very heavily dominated by Python, right? I, as a developer documentation kind of person, I sometimes have a hard time making the case for .NET on single board devices. So I'm kind of curious as to where you see that positioning and like how that works, like with Nano Framework, even because like Nano Framework targets the really small, like ESP32 devices and so forth.
Yeah, I actually, my answer is going to be a little blurry. I have a totally different kind of opinion. Like one of the things that we started investing in .NET a couple of years ago when we started doing Blazor on the client was WASM, WebAssembly. And WASM is the ability to basically run, typically browsers can only run JavaScript, but with WASM, they can run pretty much any language. And companies like Autodesk have shown versions of AutoCAD that kind of run in the browser. That's a C++ application. And so I think when I think of IoT, I really think WASM could be the future of IoT. And I say that because, why should you be, required to use a particular language, whether it's Python or JavaScript or .NET or whatever? I think in the long run, we'd love to be able to say, hey, we have IoT edge devices in our cloud. And if we empower those to run WASM, they can run all those languages. And they can run all those languages without having to put the runtime on the box. I mean, for example, in the case of .NET, if you're doing a modern .NET 6 installation, maybe I don't want my IoT device to have 90 megs of .NET on the box, and so maybe I don't even want to have Python on the box. I mean, Python puts a lot of files on the disk. I mean, maybe you would know more about this, Cam, than I would if there's micro versions of Python that don't have as much baggage with them. But I really like the idea of compiling any language down to WASM, saying there is no framework on the box at all, and making it ubiquitous where it doesn't really matter. Use the tech you're most familiar with, and don't feel like you're, and the other cool thing about WASM to me is, I don't want to have to compile to ARM32 or ARM64 or whatever architecture. The cool thing about WASM is if I make a WASM executable, it works on all those platforms. And so I know that it's an area and things that we are experimenting with in Microsoft, is if WASM is something we could do more in these kind of places.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I could get behind that.
All right. So I didn't answer the question directly, but I think it's a broader answer, and I don't think we should limit IoT just to be Python. It should be able to be whatever language you want to use.
Cool.
So I wanted to take a look at some of the pre-submitted questions here. There is one particular question that I've seen a lot of chatter about as of late, and that is .NET MAUI. The question here is, did .NET MAUI ship too soon? The person here is pointing out he or she is a Xamarin developer today. Should they be investing the time to learn MAUI, knowing that there are many open issues and bugs in the GA product? What advice do you have?
Yeah, so I think for that question, first off, for people who don't know, .NET MAUI is the evolution of the Xamarin technology. We acquired Xamarin back in 2016, and one of our goals was to make the Xamarin technology be a part of .NET. And what I mean by that is we want to use the same base class libraries as you would use in a regular .NET application. So you have the most compatibility across all the APIs and stuff like that. We wanted to have the ability to be native on more than just iOS and Android. So now, MAUI can be native on Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. And it is an evolution. And we originally planned to ship MAUI back in .NET 5. And we realized, early into .NET 5, there was no way that was going to happen. And so we moved it to .NET 6. Now, the cool thing for you as a customer is Xamarin is still in the box as well. And so you can still build Xamarin applications. And you can also build MAUI applications. MAUI applications are going to give you, more .NET compatibility. They're going to work with more of the libraries that already exist out there. They're going to give you the additional places to run your apps on Windows and Mac. But it is a new product. And I was talking to Scott and Cam and Myra earlier, and I was saying, I remember when we shipped .NET Core 1.0, and this would be back in 2016, and it was a little early itself. For example, if you know the full history, it had a different project format called Project JSON. We shipped it because we had some big customers that needed a GA product to be available because they couldn't move. By policy, they're not allowed to ship production stuff on preview technology, and so we shipped that a little early. It wasn't until we got it wasn't until .NET Core 1.1, which was February, I think, of 2017. It shipped with an updated VS that supported the CS Proj. That product really kind of came into its own, and so MAUI might be a little early. But as I said, we left the other product in the box for you, so you still have a safe place to be. I would be exploring MAUI because that is the future. And the nice thing about the way we ship .NET today is we ship it on a regular basis, and so it's you don't have to wait for .NET 7 for that to get better or .NET 8 for that to get better. We're shipping updates continually. In fact, we shipped .NET 6 last November, and there's been various updates to the MAUI tech. Over the last year, including the GA of it recently, even the tooling side. So, sometimes for emerging tech, you got to be a little bit early. And we also want to, our preview tech doesn't get a lot of customers in many cases. We have millions of customers, but thousands are using the previews. And so getting it into a GA also means it opens the funnel up to more customers, and we get more feedback. And I said the cool thing about .NET today is we can react to feedback very quickly.
Awesome. I think we can queue up one from José Silva. And it also matches one of our pre-submitted questions, which is like, what are the next achievements for .NET? And the pre-submitted question is like, what is the future of .NET? And someone was also asking about the .NET 8 roadmap and deliverables, and when will they be able to see that? So I know it's not your day-to-day anymore, but I think you're like deeply engaged with that. So like, do you know what's happening?
I do talk to the .NET team quite often, and it's very important that I do, because one of the things we want to do is we want to make sure that all the services we build in Azure work great in .NET. And as I look at .NET 7, which is coming out in GA in November, in many ways it's a continuation of some of the stuff that we did. There'll be a better version of MAUI in there, obviously, to the prior question. But one of the things that I really like is in the cloud world, we're seeing containers kind of become the way that you actually build and publish. It's the new deployment model for the cloud. And one of my favorite .NET 7 features is the ability to build containers right from the CLI in .NET. Our goal all up at Microsoft and with .NET is to make developers' life easier. And so I think of how many concepts are required to go take a .NET application and get it running in a container in the cloud. And today it's too many. And even with .NET 7, it's still too many. But we can get to a better place. And I'll give examples of this. I just have an app. I want to run it in Azure Container Apps. I want to be on containers because that's what I hear is the hot thing. I want to be running on top of Kubernetes because that is tech that is it works on all the clouds. It works on prem, and so we want to continue to reduce that friction. So .NET 7, as I said, you can actually build containers right from the command line tools. But I envision a day where I don't have to install Docker Desktop. I don't have to turn Hyper-V on. I don't have to have WSL. I don't have to have Docker files. We want to get to a place, and I hope we do this in .NET 8, where I just have my ASP.NET Core application, and I say, put it in Azure, and all that containerization and all that other stuff just happens for you. Now, of course, if you're the developer that wants control over that stuff, we want to give you those controls, and that's important. And so that's an area that I really see .NET moving towards. Another one that I really focus on because of the role that I'm in now is we've all heard this word cloud native. And primarily cloud native. Cloud native means a ton of things. In fact, inside of Microsoft, I've got a 25-page white paper that somebody in DevDiv wrote on what cloud native actually means. But to me, cloud native means, in many cases, we have a bunch of customers today that build applications first on premise, and they might have built these apps over the last 20 years, and then they want to move them to the cloud to reduce cost at some point. A cloud native app is an app that was born in the cloud. It never ran on premise to start with, and so if you're that type of application, what can we do in .NET to make that easier for you? And so I'll throw out a whole bunch of ideas of things that we think about all the time. And it's funny. If you went and talked to like David Fowler, he would probably tell you .NET's already cloud native. And I would say, yeah, it is. If you know all the switches to throw and all the things to make it work great, like moving an app to the cloud. The first thing is, if you're on-prem, I can see the wire running between the servers, and I know there's nothing's going to block that. Once you're in a cloud, all kinds of weird things can happen, and so your app has to be kind of more resilient. And we do have capabilities like EF Core's got a capability for putting retries in with a client factory, and in .NET you can actually use Poly and put some policies in. But really what cloud native means is, hey, I want to be able to scale my app as well. And so, today to do that, you'd be doing something where you're actually listening to a message queue, and when something happens there, you take an action. How do we make all that stuff just feel transparent in .NET? So, in the Java world, there's something called Spring Boot, which is kind of the cloud native framework for Java, and .NET needs something along those lines. And one of the cool aspects of being at Microsoft is we run a ton of huge .NET inside of Microsoft. And so in the .NET 8 wave, what we want to do is we want to take advantage of what we're learning internally, running things at crazy scale, and making that available to all of our customers, no matter what their scale is. And whether that's going to be a sample or a framework, I'm not actually sure yet, but that's where a bunch of heads are put down and thinking about, what's next for .NET. I'll go back to .NET 7 and I'll say one more fun thing that I really appreciate in .NET 7 is, I said before, our job is to make your life easier. And so we introduced the minimal APIs in .NET 6, and .NET 7. One of the big things that happens there is, we showed that, but once you want to add security and authorization to those APIs, how do we make that easier? And that was too hard in .NET 6, and .NET 7 makes a big step in making it very easy to go take those same APIs and turn on all those security features, and not, doubling or tripling or quadrupling your code size in the process. And so it's that continual refinement of making .NET more easy and more approachable. Oh, yes, I love that. That's one of my favorite topics.
Thanks for that answer, Scott. I wanted to go back to the pre-submitted questions. We have one that's asking about .NET in academia. The question is just pointing out that in high schools and colleges all over the world, it seems like .NET and C# aren't really focused on there. It's other ecosystems, other languages like Java, like Python, like JavaScript. What's being done to improve that situation?
A bunch of things. First off, I'll give you the real answer here. In this space. And so if you go to college, primarily what you're going to see today, you're going to see a mix of Java, Python, and JavaScript is what I would primarily guess. When I went to college, you would have seen C++ there as well, or C or /C++, but it's been 20 years since I've been out of college, and so that's kind of gone away. And so, what I kind of find is, college professors teach what they know and what they grew up with. And so what you find is language change in academia takes a very, very long time. So you can't just go say, hey, let's go make it all C# or whatnot. In many cases, the stuff that we've done across the .NET Core journey to .NET 6 are the types of things that we needed to do to make it more approachable to academia. In the past, imagine with .NET Framework, you have to be on a Windows machine. oh, you have to go and install this tool called Visual Studio, which is big, and you have to get approval potentially to install it on your hardware. You need to get a license to install it on your hardware. So in many ways, the work we've done in the .NET Core space to .NET 6 has erased a bunch of these things. Hey, now you can actually install it on the machine without admin rights. We no longer require a big fancy tool to use the product. The product is fully open source. It works on all the devices. So we've done that work to make it, at least easier to be used. I have a slide here, and I know Myra's seen this slide before.
Yeah, we can share.
Well, while you're pulling that up, Scott, do you feel like the word, like to your point that .NET Core and then on to .NET 5 and .NET 6 is, of course it's done a lot toward erasing that limitation on .NET Framework, but do you feel like the word is getting out?
I as I said before, it would take a long time for things to change, but I can't find the slide anymore. I'm not going to dig around the whole time, but there was a slide I used to show that said that when we polled new .NET customers on the .NET website, 40% of them said they were students. They were new to .NET and students. We do see spikes in the product, both C++ and .NET when college years start off. So there is interest there, but I don't expect us to be the mainline languages that are taught. Python is everywhere, JavaScript is everywhere. I don't think we should be offended that C# not there. I don't think Go's there. I'm not sure that Rust is there. There's so many languages that are out here today, and I don't think we should expect them all to be taught at college. I mean, when I went to college, the way it kind of works is once you learn one or two languages, it's not hard to go pick up another language. And in many cases, you're going to kind of adapt to, whatever the job you're going to go find is going to use. In my case, when I was in computer science, we learned C++ and Java. And then there was one class, which was a programming language class, where you tried a bunch of other languages. But I think all we can do is keep trying to make the entry of .NET easier and easier. And I think we took another step with .NET 6 with the minimal API tech. And we've slowly, with C# features, getting rid, with top-level programs of a bunch of structure and stuff that made .NET feel kind of old and outdated. And so that's our best approaches, are just keep making it easier and simpler, for .NET. But I don't think, and we do, Scott Hanselman's team we did a whole university tour a couple of years ago where we went out to a bunch of universities and put on presentations of .NET. And we had lots of people that came in and got excited. I mean, if you're a computer science person, if you're a nerd, you're going to try more than just whatever they teach you in class. So I think we just have to keep making .NET better. That's the best we can do.
Yeah, and I think some of the things like notebooks and coding packs, so you're not required to have like admin rights to your machine to be able to install things. Like we're making things easier for folks to adopt on any environment and across platform as well. So totally agree. But it is a slow process. So it's like changing the perception and changing the tech. And now we're supporting all these cross-platform. I think it's like the step in the right direction. And now it's like people getting excited about it and maybe deciding to pick it up to teach their classes, right?
Totally agree.
Digging into that a little bit, so I'm reminded of something else. I commonly hear this question. Folks who look at .NET for the very first time see it's not just C# that can be used. It's also VB and F#. What's the story there? Why the three languages in .NET?
Yeah, there's some history there. So before there was even a .NET, there was this product called Visual Basic that had huge uptake in the industry. I mean, it was the kind of the premier drag and drop, I would think, kind of language back in the day. And at the same time, there was also something called active server pages too. So I'm gonna kind of go both directions on this and say there was this thing called active server pages, and it goes way back to, I want to say 1996. I could be wrong. I think it was something called NT Option Pack 4 was the thing that brought that, and it brought scriptable web programming to IIS on Windows back in the day. And when .NET was being built inside of Microsoft, we wanted to appeal to both of those audiences, the VB audience and to the active server page audience. And that's why, active server page ASP, and notice we have ASP.NET. And so in many cases, historically, ASP.NET is interesting as well, because all the objects, request, response, server, and so on that existed in ASP.NET and .NET Framework were copies of the same objects that were in active server pages. And that was to help migrate those customers from active server pages to .NET. And then once again, VB was the same kind of thing. It's like, hey, let's go and give those VB customers a place to migrate to. And so we try to make the VB support in .NET as close as possible to that language. And so you can kind of see that in many cases, some of the history of our products are based on trying to bring people forward from the other products. But VB is a great language. In many cases, it's got some things that are a little simpler than C#. And our goal moving forward is to make sure that any of our .NET customers on .NET Framework that want to move their projects forward into the newer .NET don't have to go change the language to do so. And so we're going to make sure that the VB can at least call libraries written in the latest C#. But our goal is not to go make VB more complicated either. And so you're not going to see a lot of language innovation there, because it's already simple, and let's not go and make it more complicated. F# is from a different direction, and we should go back in time. Back when Scott Guthrie announced some of .NET at the Build conference, whenever ago that was, the idea was many languages. They talked about having lots of languages that ran on top of .NET. That was kind of one of the differentiators of it as well. And so there's a COBOL.NET product out there today where you can actually migrate your mainframe projects forward onto like .NET. But the three that really kind of stuck the most, I think, are VB, C# and F#. And F# started off as an idea of saying, if you want more of a functional programming language on top of .NET, it's designed for that. F# is great if you want to do like machine learning, you want to do any kind of querying across data. There's some great frameworks for .NET on top of F# for building web applications. They're like, if you really like that really tight, terse code, you want a lot of stuff in a few characters. F# is kind of there for you. But C# is the primary language that we build .NET inside of Microsoft. It's where we experiment with new language features. But we're happy that we can have those other communities hang around and have different experiences on the same tech.
On behalf of myself and some other audience members, is there any chance we could ever see FoxPro in .NET?
Well, Cam, I think if you could find me 1 million FoxPro customers that want that, we would need a large number of customers to justify that investment.
Cam, we might need a phone a friend feature on the show. We could call Julie Lerman right now and ask about FoxPro.
I think Beth Massey was a FoxPro person in some part of her background.
I believe so. Yeah.
So there's plenty of FoxPro people that are in the .NET team.
But for someone starting with .NET, would you recommend C# since that's like the primary language that like new app models come first and that kind of thing?
It is. I'd recommend C# as you're getting started language with .NET. I'd recommend VB if you have code that you're moving from .NET Framework over to .NET, and I'd recommend F# if you want to get on the bleeding edge and try a semi-functional language that's really terse. But as I said, there's some great frameworks for F# on there as well. But I would always start with C#.
All right. We got a question that was a follow-up from the cloud native team, which is Dapr not that cloud native framework? I realize that it's cross-platform, but it's so good. And I know that Dapr is on your team. So like, can you talk a little bit about Dapr and like what's happening there?
Yeah, so Dapr, Dapr is a framework that we build, and it is a cloud native framework. Primarily, what you kind of assume with Dapr is, hey, we know that nobody builds their entire company on one particular language anymore. You might be building your back end with C#. You might be building a front end with JavaScript. You might be building some machine learning with Python, and you might have some Java code somewhere in there as well. And so it kind of has the assumption that we have all these different languages, and how do we make it easier to talk across those languages? And so Dapr does a couple things for you. If you're a .NET developer, with just one line of code change, basically, if you have an HTTP client factory, you can add a single header to that to all your HTTP calls, and that will Dapr enable your REST calls. That Dapr support for you will give you those retries and all that, and logging and stuff for free. As I mentioned earlier, hey, you can go write some code to turn those things on in .NET, but you gotta write all that code. And so Dapr, you can actually just add a header, and it'll solve some of that for you. It makes it very easy to call across different programming languages. So I can call from .NET to Java, Java to .NET, in a very transparent manner. But one of the cooler parts of the Dapr world is it abstracts away a lot of cloud things. So for example, if I'm doing pub sub, publish and subscribe, what do I run locally for that pub sub? Then if I put it in Azure, what service do I use to manage that pub sub for me in Azure? Well, I don't want to write different code for testing locally versus running in Azure. And so Dapr has an entire area of components like pub sub, where it has adapters. So I can write the code once using Dapr and run it locally with whatever local server I'm going to use for pub sub, move it to Azure, and that is abstracted out of the way. And so it gives you the kind of the transparency of being able to move across services and clouds and on-prem. And so it is something that you'll see us make sure that we make it even easier to use with .NET. We talk with the .NET team all the time for that. But that just because Dapr is great, I do think there is still lots of benefit of saying, hey, I'm a .NET shop, and I want to use native .NET and not go through an abstraction layer to do that. And so both of those are valid options.
Cool. And I think, like, as you said before as well, like making it friendlier for beginners that are trying to understand the cloud world and how, because I think like some of these concepts are still like complicated for people that are getting started.
Yeah, that's what's, I was just having beer with Glenn Condron on last Friday, and we were actually talking about what if we could do a pub sub for .NET and you wouldn't even know it's pub sub. I just want to call, or we were thinking about messaging, like, hey, the way you build a scalable backend is, there's something in the front end that puts a message in a queue, and then a backend process at some point actually calls that. What if we made that so transparent that as far as you were concerned in the front end, you just said, go do this job, and the backend code did the job, and you never saw the messaging queue. And so that's, when you think about a cloud native framework for .NET, that's what a cloud native framework for .NET does. Dapr, you're still going to program against the messaging queue. The things that the .NET team can do is go just make the messaging queue disappear. It's still there, but you don't have to program to it. And as I said, that's the magic we do with C# and .NET, is we take hard things and make them simple. Like for example, imagine this is a simple .NET thing. I've got a folder on disk, and I want to know when a file's dropped in there. I create a file watcher, and then I give it the parameters, and then a file's dropped in. And when that happens, I get a message and I can do something. If you want to build that same thing in Azure today, you're going to have a storage account, you're going to have an event hub and a service bus, and some place to stick your configuration, and then wire up all the goop to make that happen. What if we could make that as simple, where, hey, I've got a storage account in Azure, and I want to basically say, call me when somebody drops a file there. Once again, I just described the way that works in Azure today is across a bunch of services and a bunch of technologies. You won't get it right the first time. Christoph on the Azure SDK team did this exact idea, and he was like, wow, lots of code to do this. And so a cloud native framework for .NET tries to hide all that complexity. And if you're the crazy nerd that wants to go and turn all the dials, you still can. But if you want the nice abstraction on top of that, we hope to provide those for you.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think like one thing that we talked in the past that I don't know what's the status or like how much it has improved. I remember talking to you about like diagnostics inside Azure when you're running .NET applications. So like, how do you see that now? Like, can we still make improvements and that kind of thing?
We can always make improvements there. So we do some cool stuff for diagnostics for you in .NET. So if you like publish your app up to like app service, and you have an app insights service as well, we wire the glue up for you automatically. So that's one of our benefits. We can go, hey, we see that you're .NET, we see that you have app insights. We can dynamically inject the right configuration and libraries into your application and wire that up for you automatically. That said, just because I gave you logs doesn't mean that we've actually made your life easy. Wouldn't it be great to know that, hey, my API is failing because it can't find the other side? Today, all we would do is give you all the logs with all the crashes. We don't come and give you a dashboard saying, here's what's failing. I can't tell you how many times that there was one time that Damian Edwards and David Fowler, they were working on the .NET website, which you drive, Myra, and we had moved it to Azure, and we had scaled it up to multiple instances, and it was failing. And it took them a day to go figure out why it was failing. And that just kind of shows me that, yeah, just because we put logs out to the disk doesn't mean or to a service in the cloud, it doesn't mean it's easy to go fix the problems. And so, anything we can do to tell you that, hey, your API is failing, and here's why we think your API is failing, that's better diagnostics than just the raw crash errors that you would see today.
Cool. Yeah, looking forward to seeing more on that.
Me too.
Yeah, and we do see as we work on the website with running on Azure. That's kind of like a good playground for us because we see a lot of what customers are seeing in their real projects, like when we're running the website. So it's also good for us to feel the pain sometimes, but also like some of the benefits we get from the platform. So.
And I for folks that don't know, I get to see this. I mean, Myra reports to us on a monthly basis about the outages that happen on the .NET website, and most of you never see any of those outages, but they're still there, and the cloud is the cloud.
But luckily, it's like we're a super small team, so it's like we don't have like people, like we're always on call, but luckily there is not like a lot of issues, so that's good. Like we get some things from time to time, but it's like pretty minimal, I would say.
So I want to go back to the live chat. We have a question that's come up a couple of times, and the question here is, why is the product named .NET? I'm going to add something extra to this question and also ask, when .NET Framework was being developed, was there any consideration around renaming the product to something else other than .NET Core?
So I can't tell you why it was named .NET back in the day. So .NET was named .NET 20 years ago, and I've only worked at Microsoft for 15 years, so I don't go that far back. But naming is always funny. I'm laughing when naming comes up on the call because one of my jokes.
It's tricky.
One of my jokes in the old days was, when .NET. Here's a funny Microsoft kind of thing is, hey, there's this .NET thing and it was successful. I remember when there was Windows Server .NET. Literally back in 20 years ago, we rebranded every product with .NET somehow. And my favorite joke is there was Windows Server.net that did not even come with .NET installed. You had to go manually install .NET on Windows Server. But it was about 2013, 2014 is when we started thinking about doing what became .NET Core, and it's now .NET 6. And we did think of renaming. We were going, hey, .NET Framework it has a reputation. The reputation is it runs on Windows only. It's closed source. And so Scott Hanselman and I actually wrote a huge deck, which I wish I could find again someday, where we had a whole ton of new names for .NET. And we were so excited. We're gonna go convince Scott Guthrie to rename .NET so we don't have to call the new .NET anything. And we go sit with Scott. And I think I had a 30-minute meeting with Scott and my boss, Bill Staples, at the time. And Scott Guthrie, that meeting went for 2.5 hours. It went longer than the 30 minutes. And he told us every reason not to do that. And his reasons are valid. 2013, so at that point, .NET is 12 years old. Microsoft had spent probably billions of dollars marketing .NET. If you just start over again, you're walking away from billions of dollars of marketing. I don't know if we had renamed it, if anybody would have even noticed the new product. It might have just not even been seen. And so, Scott was like, you can't walk away from all that knowledge, all that marketing, even though some of it isn't what you want. You should just not move away from the .NET name. And so that's primarily the reason we didn't change the product, at all. Minus, .NET Core felt like you kept the brand, you added the new moniker to it, saying it was different. And then, once we got to, we'd shipped .NET Core 3, we'd shipped 3.1. And our next fear was if we had .NET Core 4 and .NET Framework 4, that felt like a confusing message. And so then we did the crazy thing and we skipped the 4 and went to the 5. And at the same time, we dropped Core as well. And so that's why it's now .NET 5 and .NET 6. And the idea there was we had to show customers that the future was this newer tech. At some point, you need to have a message saying that, hey, yeah, the newer tech has a bigger version number than the older tech. And I'm not discounting .NET Framework at all. It's a great product. Still have millions of users on that product, and we'll support that thing forever. In fact, we have an ARM64 version of that framework coming out this fall. Because we know that ARM chips are very popular, and Windows is going to is doing a bunch more stuff on ARM, and we want to make sure the .NET Framework is there as well. So we're not walking away from that tech, but that's kind of the history of the naming of .NET and why it is what it is today. And there's been notions, especially on Twitter, that hey, we should actually rename it again to DOT-NET.
Had the drop the dot campaign.
drop the dot. And what I would say then again is, once again, you're going to walk away from all that branding that we've done for all those years. And this is something that I tell my friends in .NET all the time is we made a lot of changes between the .NET Core to where we are today. And .NET needs to get mature again. And so I think .NET should not be changing its name, not be changing its branding and all those things. Each time you change one of those things, it takes years for that to filter through the system. And so, we've got a great brand, we've got an awesome brand new product, and we need to let it mature and be stable. You can't be changing Google and SEO and stuff every 3 years. Not good for us.
Yeah, and I think there's so much material already, that changing everything would also be really painful for all the teams involved. So
for folks that don't know, Myra used to come from the documentation team, and so she knows all about. She was in the doc team when we were first doing the .NET Core stuff, and I remember all the work we had to go put those selectors in all the pages. So you could just are you on the core bits or are you on the framework bits? So you know that pain, Myra. You've
Oh
already done
yeah, I understand it, and Cam and Scott as well. As Cam is still in docs, and Scott also came from docs. So like,
it.
yeah.
I was going to say it's weird that I was going to say the whole team except me on the call has been in docs. I'm the only person that's not been in docs.
I mean, next time we have an opening on the team, Scott, I could let you know.
You can. I would.
So I wanted to ask another question we had submitted here. And the question is getting to Microsoft versus community. Where do you draw the line? Should Microsoft provide a solution for all things in the .NET space?
That's a couple of questions, I think, more than, I can interpret that question in many ways. I know the community over time has always wondered, should there be a version of .NET that's not Microsoft? I mean, there was forks last year of the product into things like that. And the reality is, I think we've been a pretty good steward of the technology. I mean, if I look at one of the slides that we had, we had 21,000 contributions in the .NET 6 timeframe from 7,000 community contributors. And so that's amazing. But one of the cool things about, .NET being Microsoft is go find me another open source project that has 300 plus people working on it full time. The benefit the community gets by having Microsoft being involved in .NET is, you have a bunch of great people here that really care and love about this product and are making it. And we're not making decisions that make it, Microsoft only. There's no, I can't think of any Microsoft bias that really is in the product that I'm aware of during the whole time that I worked in it. I mean, in fact, like the Azure parts of .NET, they're not part of the .NET team. That's the tooling team that builds tools for .NET. And we didn't put features in the product to make it be more toolable for Azure or anything like that. So I do think we actually are pretty good when it comes to stuff like that. And at the same time, I also think that, when it comes to community projects, we try not to go and run over a community project. For example, if you're using the open API stuff in .NET, that's using a package called Swashbuckle. We didn't go build that tech. There was already a great solution there, and we went and used that tech. The same thing is, Newtonsoft, for all the JSON parsing, we never went and made a Newtonsoft compete. Yeah, there is actually some native JSON support in the newer .NET bits, but it doesn't do anything like what Newtonsoft does, kind of by design. .NET needed enough JSON to boot up and do some core things, but that Swiss Army knife that you get with Newtonsoft is not something that the team would ever, go and do. And we've done other work, like if you want to use things like authentication from our tools, we give you a couple of our choices, and there's a link at the bottom of the dialogue that'll go take you to some community pages where you can see more stuff. So I think there's always a hard balance of, I don't want to have my customers go file new and see 7,000 options, because that makes .NET way more complicated than the other tech. So we're always trying to find the line, but we are very open to making sure that we make the community projects that are out there successful on .NET. That is part of the ecosystem, and it's very important for the tech.
Thank you for answering that. We have another question here, pre-submitted as well. And the question is simply, is C# moving too fast? What are your thoughts?
Well, and let me add on to a little bit. There was a question that an audience member asked. I don't know. I would have to scroll up to find it, but it was a spin on that. And basically, they were saying something that they feel like they haven't seen any new marquee features in the C# language, just like syntactic sugar stuff.
Well, I would say if you're using minimal APIs in .NET 6, there's a lot of syntactical sugar stuff there that is really, really big. To me, it's not syntactical sugar, but what it is you didn't have to, we removed all the typecasting. So if you were using lambdas, before it required these awful typecasts to be in the product. We were doing minimal APIs, and I was looking at a prototype of it. This is probably a year ago. And I'm like, wow, it's got ugly typecast all the way down the side of the screen. And we were asking ourselves, if you were new to .NET, would that make any sense? Here's my favorite, two-sided question. Are we moving too fast in C#? And I would say no. And I'll say no for this reason. If you are comfortable with the C# features that you're using today, you don't have to use any of the new features. So the nice thing about a language edition is if you've been coding C# for the last 20 years and you don't want to use any of the new language features, don't. Use them when they feel comfortable and they feel like they make sense to you. So I don't ever feel, I would not want customers to go out and say, oh, there's 5 new C# features, I must use them. And so I don't think it's moving too fast from that perspective, because we don't force you to use any of the newer tech. The features in C# that I really appreciate the most, and I'm biased because I want to make .NET more approachable to developers that are not .NET developers, but I really love the global using tech that we built inside of the last wave. A .NET project before had using system, using ASP.NET star, 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 star at the top of every page. And there was just so much of that that was always there. C# projects had to have a class, and they had to have a static inside of that class. It was the main entry point for the projects. While if I'm a Python or Node developer, I just start writing code. And so I love the top level program tech that we use to move that out of the way. I love the fact that if you're doing namespaces, the first thing we did in a project is we put a namespace at the top and indented your whole program over a tab or a couple of spaces. And I love the fact that you can just now say there's a global namespace where I just put a semicolon at the end, and we don't move your file over. And these aren't big features. Well, they probably are big features. But to me, when I can go write a hello world in one line of code now, without all of that weird ceremony before, these are my favorite C# features. I know there's a whole bunch of other crazy things to I love records. Once again, as somebody that wrote a lot of database work in .NET, having to write a class and get it and getters and setters for every property, wow, that was a lot of code. And so I think all of these things just make .NET more approachable, where something that would be 100 lines of code before is actually going to be 10 or 15 lines of code today. And none of those are hard concepts. There are other .NET features in C# that are more complicated, but I don't use them. I use the stuff that makes me productive and happy. And so I don't think we're moving too fast. And as I said, we don't force you to use the new stuff if you don't want to.
Yeah, we've been slowly moving to the new C# features on the website, for example. So like we've done some, but we prioritize according to our backlogs. So it's like some are still to be done, like records and things like that.
And we did user studies. So Maria on the team actually sat down with new developers, and they showed them Python and JavaScript and .NET. And that's a lot of these features came from seeing people go, why is this here? Why is that there? Why is this here? And in many cases, when I used to present on this, I used to laugh, and I'm like, why did it take us 20 years to remove all those usings? Once it's happened, you're like, wow, my code looks so much better.
Yeah, and so much easier for someone to get started.
Yeah.
All right, we're coming to an end, so I think we're gonna have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Do you have anything queued up, Scott and Cam?
If you don't, I do. But just looking at the chat here, I'll cue this one up from our friend Fuel Snable. Scott, what's your favorite C# feature of all time?
Wow, that's a tough one. I'm not sure it's a C# feature, but my favorite feature of all time will be link. Being able to write expressions, especially linked to SQL or linked entity framework, being able to write SQL expressions in C# is probably my favorite feature. I'm not sure that's a C# feature or a .NET feature, but link's probably my favorite all time.
Yeah, that's how I would have answered the question as well. I love link to SQL. I'm curious though, can you provide some background on how that feature was born? I'm not sure if you were around when it was being developed or any insight you can
I
share.
was around when that. I was going to say if the other feature of all time I would have said would be async await. Being able to write async code, without having to write all the callbacks and stuff like that for you is another one that I think is a super important one. Link to SQL is actually more, or link is more than we have time left for me to answer, because the reality is link is a ton of features that were put in. I think it was C# 3 or 3.5 was when all these features came into be. For example, we talked about lambdas earlier. Lambdas were created as part of link. And so link expressions are actually doing some of that lambda stuff under the covers for you. But there's like 3 or 4 big C# features that are all tied together to make link actually possible. And I hope we can do more of those types of things in the future. I'll throw out my favorite example. In the Apple world, there's something called Swift UI. And that's where you can actually write your UI tech in native Swift versus, before they had designers and it was creating XML and some of the same kinds of stuff that our tech would have done. And so Apple over years was dropping features into Swift. And then one day all those features culminate together into Swift UI. And so I would love us to go find the next wave of those kinds of improvements to C#, where we put a bunch of small features in, and then, in .NET 8 or 9, some amazing, maybe you build your Maui applications or your Blazor applications, all in C#. Something along those lines, but that's the shortest answer I can give you.
Yeah, and I want to encourage folks as well, because we didn't get to all the questions. So if you want to reach out on Twitter, you can reach out. If there are any product suggestions, you can go to the repos. Like I've seen some Blazor or Maui questions and some feature asks. And so go open those questions on the GitHub repositories, because that's where it's open source. So that's where the team is working. They have a huge backlog in some cases, but I'm sure that they'll triage and get to your question eventually. So I also encourage you with that. And some people were saying generics, which is also a pretty good feature in C#.
Yes, that's a great feature, and it's so built into .NET you don't even think about it. So generics are, async, link, generics, top level programs would be all in my mix. There's not a single one for me. Async await is amazing because it was created in .NET, and then almost every other language now has their version of it now as well. So it's when you see a groundbreaking feature that we put in and it gets cloned everywhere, that really is showing you that it's a great feature.
Scott of Type T.
I saw that. Scott, one final question. We've got 2 minutes remaining. I want to maximize the time and squeeze in one last question. If you could identify just one thing that had the biggest impact on your career at Microsoft, what would that one thing be?
This is going to sound weird. I'm going to give you 2 things. One thing is, maybe 10 years ago, Microsoft restructured. We used to have this deep hierarchy of management, and we flattened the management tree, and that gave people like myself more autonomy to do work in the products. And so that was a huge shift in the company. And then for me personally, I'm going to say this. I call this diversity of team. Is over my career at Microsoft, my team is a much more diverse team than it was when I first joined Microsoft. Microsoft as a company is a much more diverse company. And when you hear people talk about diversity, they always think about you're meaning sex or race or skin color. No. Diversity of opinion. Having a team around me that's different than me, that challenges me every day, and is willing to give me, it's been proven that having a diverse group of ideas and people builds better products. And so I really appreciate that my team is such a diverse team today, and we have diverse opinions and diverse ideas, and because of that, we build better products.
All right. So there you heard it, folks. We're at time for the show. I want to thank all of our viewers for your loyalty and for tuning in for today's AMA. As a reminder, you can check out other great .NET Live TV streams and videos out at dot.net/live. Tune in next week. We'll be joined by 18-year .NET veteran Sabila Spalding. Sabila will join us to talk about lessons learned while using the product over the course of that 18 years in the trenches. See everyone next week. Bye.
Bye.